fastest you have ever seen a new coworker get fired? Story 14 or so hours. When I was 18, I got a job at a grocery store along with 3 others. We all started training together. On the first day, we were training in the evening, and one girl asked to go home. She said her head hurt. They said fine. She clocked out, went to grab a grocery cart, and started filling it with beer and liquor. The store manager walked over and asked her if she was having a party. She said yes, didn't even try to come up with an excuse, just, yeah, I am. So I needed to leave early on my first day. Basically, he fired her. Story 2, he didn't show up the first day, second day, or third day. I had to work a double shift for 3 days straight. Not fun. I answered the phone when he finally called in on the 4th day. He said, I'm going to be honest with you. I've been in Orlando. My parents paid for a small vacation as a reward for getting the job. Would it be okay to start next week instead of this week? Story 3, guy got hired, went through training and all that jazz. First day on the floor, he disappeared for 3 hours and then came back high as on like meth or something. A manager found him in the bathroom aisle, staring at himself in the mirror. Said manager looked at the cameras after firing him. The guy was there staring at himself for at least 30 minutes. Edit to clear up some questions. I worked at Home Depot. He was in the aisle where we sell bathroom countertops and medicine cabinets. We also have mirrors in this aisle, and that's where he was, not in the bathroom, haha. Story 4, before their first day on orientation. I got hired for a manufacturing job through Manpower temp agency. Me and a friend of my wife were both supposed to start on Monday at the plant for a week-long orientation. She got into a fender bender on her way to orientation and called them to say that she'd be a bit late, that she just needed to wait on the police to give a statement. The manager told her not to bother ever coming in. Girl was torn up. She took pictures and the police report in to the hiring manager. Tried to explain things to the company HR managers, but no dice. She was fired before ever clocking in. Story 5, worked in a grocery store for a while. New guy took a lobster out of the tank and removed the elastic bands on its claws, then proceeded to put it back in the tank. The thing murdered all the other lobsters in the tank. Story 6, 3 hours into the first shift. Guy lost it serving an annoying customer in a grocery shop. Throw a cabbage at her. The manager came and told him to go home cause he finished there. He wasn't surprised I was standing next to him. It was an entertaining day. Story 7, I work construction. We had 2 new hires that were friends starting the same day. Boss told one to take a coffee order and come back. Took everyone's money and said he needed his friend to go with him cause it was a big order. They never came back. Story 8, a man was hired to do stock at a tea store that sold lots of delicate china. Manager walked into the back on his 3rd day and saw him just throwing boxes of teacups and teapots. Instantly fired. Story 9, I called a temp agency to get someone to help me count inventory. They sent a guy over with a cast on his arm. That was my first WTF, but I went with it because we were just counting parts. Then I came back from lunch, and this dude was in my office chair zoned out and drooling on himself with a can of air duster in his lap. I kicked him awake and escorted him out of my warehouse. Never used that temp agency again. Story 10, a 19-year-old kid got hired to work the seafood counter. See him twice, and then never again. Asked a coworker what happened. He had closed seafood one night and was walking out of the store, and the 5 pounds of crab legs head stuffed down the back of his pants fell out in front of the closing manager. Edit, it was at a Publix. No, it was not Jameis Winston. Story 11, new guy started on Monday and was gone by Friday. The guy hit some racking in the warehouse with the forklift. Boss saw him do it, and the guy decided to lie about it when asked if he knew what happened. Story 12, coworker smoked every 40 minutes for 10 minutes. Then asked the boss if he could leave an hour early because he didn't take his lunch break. As my boss said, sure you can, but you don't need to come back. Story 13, this was just a summer job at a fast food place. We had a new girl start, and within 2 days it was apparent she was an idiot, and everyone knew that. You could already see the manager questioning his decision. Then on her 3rd day of work, she said she couldn't come in because her mom was in a car accident and in the hospital. Turns out that's an easy thing to disprove in a relatively small town. Story 14, corporate chain restaurant new server. Aged mid-30s. 3rd day, he was working. We had to fire him mid-shift. Why? Dude went into the public restrooms, with other guests clearly in there using the urinal, and started doing lines of blow-off on the edge of the sink. Story 15, about 35 minutes, I hired a guy to work for me as quality inspector for merchandise headed to Walmart Target. He bragged about everything he stole from his last job during training and how they paid him more than I did. Well, I'm not holding him back from all that money, so I had some big guys him off the property. Story 16, I was fired on my 2nd day as a line cook at a Mitzel's restaurant in Washington State back in the 90s. Turns out I was hired just to threaten the job security of a longtime line cook with an attitude problem to keep him in line. He got the message and apologized to the manager. And I was fired for breaking a yoke when flipping fried eggs one time. I'd been a line cook for a few years by then and thought I was doing pretty good. I was taken out the back door and terminated on day 2. Edit, this really seems to be blowing up. Happened in Oak Harbor back in mid-1990s, so yes, I did find another job since then. I was pissed, but got over it quickly. Cooking for a living was hard work, standing in a hot kitchen for 10 hours at a time, going home splattered with grease, getting yelled at by waitstaff and management. I don't do it anymore. Thanks for all the hugs awards, guys. Story 17. This guy hadn't even started yet, and just had his introductory email sent out to the whole company, which ended with incredibly explicit details about himself. He got fired before he even started. Email edit, wow, this is blowing up. I don't have a lot more context I can give as it all happened so fast. Somehow, the company deleted the email from our cloud inboxes when this was sent, but not before a colleague grabbed a screenshot of it first. He was going to be a Tier 2 tech for the IT company I worked at a couple years back. He supposedly apologized profusely, saying his friend played a prank on him, but the damage had already been done. Story 18. This was a while ago on my old job. New guy gets hired as a busboy. He was super annoying and tried to insert himself into everyone's conversation, whether they wanted him there or not. It only took a couple of hours for the whole restaurant to hate him. I was working the bar, and he kept eating the bar fruit. I personally didn't care, but the manager did. Manager comes over and tells him stop eating the fruit. He looks the manager in the eye and eats another piece of fruit. Manager says, really? Followed by, come with me to the office. New guy promptly replies with, all right, man, calm down. I can tell you got that big energy for a good reason, followed with cliche wink and nudge from his elbow. In front of me and like 4 other employees, I wanted to slam my face into the ice bin. It was so cringy to witness. He promptly walked out the front door 10 minutes later without his uniform on anymore. The worst thing about it was the manager was an insanely laid-back guy. The whole restaurant was insanely laid back. You really had to try hard to get fired from this place. Had he not thrown in that big line, I'm almost positive he would have just gotten a slap on the wrist and kept the job. Guy had been working a few days at a barn. Decided to smoke right by bales of hay. Manager saw him and fired him right on the spot. At farms, you don't around with fire. Story 19, first day of work. He walks in, says what is up to the guy that parked next that didn't touch his new Camaro he bought since he got hired. The guy was the CEO of the company I used to work for, on visit to our branch. Literally 10 minutes into his shift, he was signing release papers. Story 20, coworker quit his job. Great job, great pay, great benefits to work in a radio repair place. I mean, got to do what you love. And he was also a big radio enthusiast. Got fired the first day on the job for stealing parts for his own radios at home. Took him over a year to get back with us. Surprised they rehired him. He then got fired for being a security risk about a year or so later. Story 21, the IT crew at a large government office worked on a ticket system, meaning that the government workers submitted their problem online, and one of the IT guys would pick it up on their end. The new guy just started his first day, logged into a computer in an empty office, and submitted a reinstall entire OS request so he could spend all day there. The manager decided to check in on him before lunch to see how he was doing, and he was completely asleep, fired before they even finished his hiring paperwork. Story 22, day 1 of training. Within the 6th hour of an 8-hour shift, worked in an old crank handle service elevator at a private residential condominium for very, very, very wealthy people. We told him just shut up and stare straight ahead. Don't speak unless spoken to, because old rich people are mean and don't care about you. Well, what's the new guy do? Starts a conversation right away and asks the resident, how much money do you make? Edit, to be more clear, it was a 1920 skyscraper in downtown. Story 23, I used to do a lot of field work on site investigation programs. Basically, we'd hang out on a drill rig while the drillers took rock cores, would log the cores, take photos, do some downhole tests, etc. New engineer gets sent to site and gets assigned a night shift. Some people love night shift, but most people don't. Hence sticking the junior with night shift. After 5 nights, he calls the office and says he wants to come home because he's freezing and he hates it and he can't do it. Not clear to me if he quit or got fired, but it became plain pretty quickly that this job wasn't for him. I got pulled onto that program, and I asked the drillers what the guy's deal was. They had a propane heater in the back of their van, and despite repeated invitations to sit in the back of the van, Buddy just sat in his truck all night and shivered in the middle of February. Story 24, spent my summers in college working as a laborer for a construction company. Anyway, we were doing a bunch of renovation in an active hospital, so noise and dust were a huge concern. We were a small crew and just starting renovations on an area with a super tight schedule, so the company hired a subcontractor for some of the work. Enter these 2 clowns who show up to do some demolition work. Foreman gives them the talk about how they may be used to doing things a certain way, but this is an active hospital, so rather the work take longer than for them to make a huge mess or a lot of noise. An hour later, we apparently got multiple complaints about the noise and the mess, so the foreman calls me up and says to go over there and clean up now, and that head me by shortly to see what was going on. These dudes had dust and broken wall everywhere. I could hear them halfway down the hall, just smashing away without a care in the world. The foreman shows up, and we walk in the room to witness this dude standing on a pile of rubble, swinging a sledgehammer over his head at a brick wall that he's removed the bottom from. Somehow the rest of this wall is still hanging from the ceiling. I have no idea how. Guy wasn't even wearing a hard hat, apparently oblivious that at any moment that wall might give way and crush him. The foreman lost his mind on these guys, kicked them out immediately, and got on the phone with their company and told them he didn't want to see these guys on site again. Lots of choice four-letter words were used, even threatened to fire the subcontractor entirely and get someone else to do the work. Story 25 heard this from manager I worked with when I worked in fast food. There was this one kid who didn't show up for work. He ditched work often, so the manager called around, couldn't get anyone to fill in his shift, so she had to fill it for him. A few hours into his shift, the dude ditching shows up with his friends and orders food from that manager. She fired him on the spot. Edit, these are my first awards, and y'all just multiply my karma by 10. Thanks y'all for the likes and awards. Story 26, not sure if it counts as being fired, but a guy in our basic training threatened a drill sergeant with a bayonet. No idea what happened after he went to the hospital, but I didn't see him again. Story 27 guy showed up to work on his first day with the smell of alcohol on his breath. 7 a.m. When questioned, he admitted to taking a couple swigs on the ways into calm his first day nerves. Yeah, fired on the spot. Worked here less than 20 minutes. Story 28, new director starts. At lunchtime, goes to cafeteria, pays for the first salad plate by weight, then goes back twice for refills without paying. Cafeteria has cameras. Cafeteria manager talks to the partner in charge. New director fired before the end of day. Story 29, a week. I worked in a bar and a new girl started. At work, she seemed a little rough but was fine. One day, she finished a shift, sat at the bar and ordered a red wine with lemonade and ice in it. Not really relevant to the story, just shows she is clearly insane. Her boyfriend came in. They had a huge domestic in front of my manager and several customers, and she threw her drink over her and dramatically stormed out. Story 30, first week. He's called over to the unstaffed truffle counter by a customer. Hasn't been trained in truffles, so he just grabs one from the display case and sells it to the customer. He doesn't know the display truffles are made of plastic, and the customer has already paid $90 for it when he realizes. Still not sure if it was an honest mistake or if he was planning to pocket the money. Either way, fired. Story 31, I got hired as a long-term temp with one other person to do some basic data entry work at a major brand pretty much everyone has heard of, and it was at their corporate headquarters, so pretty prestigious. Anyway, we went through all of this onboarding stuff in the morning that required us to get photo IDs and figure out parking and all that stuff. Then after 2 or 3 hours, we were introduced to one of the employees in our new department who began going over what we were going to be doing. None of it seemed overly difficult, and I figured that while it was a new system I had never used before, I'd be able to work it out in a few days as long as I asked questions and took notes. And that was the thing that made me realize that the other person who got hired with me probably lied on her resume and was completely out of her depth. She didn't take any notes and didn't ask any questions, and whenever I glanced at her, I could see flashes of panic on her face. Well, lunchtime came, and when we came back, she said that another company had called her and offered her a permanent position, and she couldn't work with us any longer. Both me and the person training us knew what was going on, but it'll give the other lady credit for finding a way out without losing face too badly. The takeaway here is yes, fake it until you make it can and does work, but you got to be able to fake it. You can't fake faking it. Story 32, my sister was fired one day one. My dad had his own small medical practice and would hire me and my sisters as our first job to be his receptionist and file insurance claims, so we could get some workplace experience before we went job hunting in a larger world. My older sister worked for him in high school for a year. I worked for him for 2 years. Then it came time for my younger sister to take over. I brought her to work to start training and said the number one rule in the office was, at work he's not dad, he's the doctor and the boss. She sassed him in front of a patient her first day, with all the venom and sarcasm a teenage girl can muster when dealing with a parent asking her to do something. He fired her on the spot, and I had to drag her out of there. Mom told her at least she'd get paid for the couple of hours she managed to be employed. Edited, my first wholesome award. Thanks. Story 33, this is the opposite route here, but I found it amusing. My boss was out of town, and I managed a tea shop near Starbucks years ago. This kid came in foreign and said he was supposed to start today. We were hiring, and I trained him, etc. My boss came back 2 days later and had no idea. The kid was in the wrong place, but he stayed with us. Hired on the spot, without even applying. Story 34. New guy drove a forklift into a fire hydrant in front of a safety rep for the company. His supervisor was called over, and he immediately tells his supervisor that he won't pass a test, as he used his only bottle of clean earlier that day when he hired in. Everybody standing there immediately burst into laughter, which continued as security, also laughing, escorted him off-site. Even the supervisor was all smiles, just gave him a pat on the back and wished him the best of luck. It was wild. Story 35. We had a new guy come in, go through all of the training on starting our factory, lockout, tagout, and all of that stuff. Said he was an electrician. Then the very first job he was asked to do, he was found working on a machine with the power locked on. There's so many things wrong with that in an industrial setting. It's unbelievable. My boss pulled him out of the machine, said, "You're too stupid to work here," and walked him out of the building. I think he was an actual employee there for 3 days at that point, and this was his first day actually on the production floor and not in training. Bonus story, because I apparently can't read. We had a guy go through the interview process, come in for his first day, take a tour of the plant, and go to his car and go home. It was a limeno and not the fruit processing plant, 2500 F1400 C kills that turn limestone into activated lime. The whole place is filthy dirty all of the time. Everything about that job sucked. I made it 4 months before the management, and working conditions outweighed the pay. I'm not surprised we had so many people quit within the first couple days or weeks of employment there. But this one guy was the fastest. Edit: sorry, I saw fired, but for some reason though quit. Edit 2, for anyone confused about how he locked the power on. It was an electrical disconnect that mounts on the front of the electrical cabinet and has a handle that has a loop you can put a lock through. When it's in the up and on position, you can put a lock through the loop, but it doesn't do anything. This guy, after going through our worksite specific Loto lockout tagout course where they actually show you how to use these electrical disconnects, and someone who claims to be an electrician put the lock on one of these in the on position and climbed into a machine. Not to mention that one of the steps of Loto is to verify that whatever you've locked out is off before stepping inside of it. Essentially, locking it in the on position wasn't the only failure of procedure, but it was the dumbest one. Story 36. This was a pizza place I worked at in college. New guy was started on Thursday. Fine worker, we showed him the ropes. He was on subs, which is the easiest job. The instructions are right in front of your face. Friday. He no-call, no-shows. It's Friday, the busiest night of the week. And he and I were the only kitchen workers that weren't also drivers. Monday, a police officer shows up at the restaurant looking for him. No idea what happened as he wasn't there. Tuesday, the owner informed me he was let go. Story 37. My document processing clerk was getting married and going on his honeymoon, so I got a short-term temp. It wasn't a temp to hire. Everything was out in the open through a legit temp agency who generally did pretty good screening. The temp's very first day, they show up with a box of things: photos, mugs, office equipment, pen cup, task light, etc. Stuff to decorate a cubicle with. I advised them and not to unpack. We were getting right into training. Within 2 hours, after I cut them loose on a computer with a "let me know if you need anything or have any questions," they said, "This mouse is hurting my wrist. It gave me carpal tunnel. I'm going to need workers' comp paperwork." I made an immediate call to the agency ending this contract, then told the temp, "Your paperwork is at the temp agency office. Go ahead and go see your rep there." They left their box of stuff behind. I had to have the temp agency come pick it up. Story 38. I work in a restaurant for my first job in high school. I was about 16 when we hired on my co-worker buddy's little cousin. This kid was a year younger than me and a total head. No one liked him because of his attitude and behavior issues. Anyways, kid gets hired, and at first he's chill. Him and I both love the same band, so we had a mutual bond and common thing to talk about. Other than that, couldn't stand him much. But during his first week, he starts to step on people's toes quite easily because he notices some of us who are friends like roasting each other. And he thought he could join in, but the comments he was making wasn't silly banter. It was full-blown rude comments that made some of us mad and get selective over when we'd joke back and forth with each other. We also started to notice this kid didn't do his job properly. Either he worked dish pit when working alone, and his lack of proper cleaning of dishes, cutlery, and etc. threw everyone behind on their closing tasks, caused we'd have to ask him to rewash everything due to food chunks being all over things. After 2-3 weeks, a number of us complained to management. This kid's older cousin even complained about him. It got so bad. The last straw, I think, for him was taking this dishwasher sprayer and started to spray people as they walked into the kitchen. He got screamed at by a number of us and was fired a few days later when it was brought to management and noticed how angry all of us were with this kid. Story 39. I owned a construction business, and we recently hired 3 new employees. Due to expansion, I didn't get to meet them yet, as my business partner was the one who interviewed them and watched them get started on the first day and would check in on them most mornings. Along with the new hired, we promoted one of our best workers to manager to oversee them. So after a few days, I noticed that we were behind schedule on the job. This wasn't all that surprising because we had the new hires, but I decided it's best to go in and check it out to make sure everything was going well. So I call up my manager and tell him to go to a different site. We did multiple sites each day, and that I will take over at the place with the new guys. I arrive at the site half an hour late due to traffic, and everyone is already hard at work. And in fact, they are working efficiently and correctly on everything. I asked them a few questions about what they are doing and so on and get all the right answers. I figured the delay was just the first 2 days of learning, and am very pleased that everything was picked up and seemed to go well. Now it is important that at this point, I didn't actually introduce myself, and nobody asked who I was, so it seems everyone just assumed that I was just another worker from the company they never met before. So 2 hours before we were supposed to finish for the day, a guy comes over and says, "Hey, just so, we're all going to head out now, but clocking that we worked the whole day, manager allows it, and the owners never noticed." So that is the story of how I fired 3 new hires on the first day I met them, and also how I had to fire our best worker. Story 40, new guy started at work a bar. Seemed pretty cool. 3 days later, we were all sitting around having an end-of-shift drink when the manager calls the new guy into the office and fires him. New guy isn't 21 yet. Why would you drink at work when the manager well knows your age? Story 41, not the funniest story, but a few months before we all started working from home, a new guy started and was fired within 1 day as we found out he has past convictions and had actually served part of his sentence in the prison he would be working in. Didn't find out until he started and someone recognized him. One of the vetting ladies was fired due to this as well, since she didn't bother to do his checks properly before he started. Story 42, where to begin. One person didn't show up for their second day, citing culture shock, and then spent at least an hour each day complaining about everything to HR. They were gone inside a month. Some other bloke refused to follow processes and called his manager an irrelevant woman in team meetings, gone within a week. My favorite was technically a new co-worker from my perspective, only his ID, only just become aware of their existence. They interpreted we're going to retire that server from production as we're going to throw the hardware off of the roof into a skip, and proceeded to head down to the data center, power the thing off in the middle of the day, drive to his friend's office, plug the box in, and deploy a bunch of IVR script head derived from our proprietary scripts, so they could run a bunch of psychic and hotlines. He was gone within 10 minutes of getting that server back. Story 43, 10-ish years ago, working at a well-known Italian chain restaurant in the States. New hire server was only a couple weeks in. Regional manager had come for a surprise visit, and as he walked into the kitchen, this server proceeded to loudly exclaim, "Inga, come onto the line, cook." Regional manager was African-American. Server was white. Server clocked out immediately. Story 44, this dude showed up to run food at the restaurant I work at, and he never read the ticket and didn't make any salads. He dropped a platter of food, spent 70 of his time standing around doing nothing. He was the slowest dishwasher ever. He took a water break every 2 minutes. My friend and I tried to drop him off, but he body slammed the door so hard the airbag sensor got disconnected. H ate the food my coworker made for me, and then stood around and laughed when I got pissed. He's 64 BTW, also 14. Anyway, my friend told him to leave because he just wasn't doing anything productive and he shouldn't get paid for wasting space. He cried and then never came back. I felt bad, but not really. Story 45, had a coworker get fired halfway through his first day, was a well-qualified rep, plenty of industry experience, and seemed cordial enough. He got fired on his lunch break when management and HR took him a lunch, and he made racist jokes about several ethnicities. He was going to be the rep for our El Paso market, which is incredibly diverse, so he was told not to even bother coming back from his lunch break. Story 46, he was escorted out by security on his second day, and promptly delivered to waiting police officers. About 5 of them had apparently beaten his wife pretty severely, and then just left for work like NBD. Never thought that they'd come looking for him. Story 47, I worked for a small city in LA for many years. I was on the board that interviewed for a new intern for the recreation department. We went through the process, made our choice, made the job offer to a nice, smart girl fresh out of college. She was a little bit of a hippie, casual, relatable. It was fine, all accepted. The girl showed up with her gigantic pet anaconda edited python wrapped around her neck on the first day. She took casual to a whole new level. Right back out the door, we hired candidate 2 instead. Story 48, less than a week. Hired a new guy at the shop I worked at. When he got hired, he did some side work at his house and claimed he did the work at said shop. He put a motor in a truck for some kid, and the motor blew. Kid's mom comes to the shop raising over our shitty work. GM was out of town on a business trip, so when he came back that Friday, he fired him. Story 49, day 1. He hit a parked car in the parking lot, with the person still inside. When he was confronted, he lost his mind and even used threats. The man he hit walked up to security and said, "Don't let that man into my building. People like that don't work for me." He hit the director's Porsche. Story 50 day. She was a high school student, still in training, and the boss basically abused her. He didn't give her a break during her first shift, was constantly looking over her shoulder and criticizing everything, too big, too small, too curved, too straight, that wears on a 15-year-old. She was not allowed to sit down, use the bathroom, or eat. At the end of the day, she had blisters all over her hands from working unprotectedly in 2C with metal equipment. She was nearly crying when her boss scolded her for putting the whipped cream on the side per customer's request instead of on top. She got fired when she arrived the day after for being late. She was an hour early. She was sad but also glad she didn't have to work in that ice cream salon anymore. Her hands took a week to heal. Story 51, I think 2 days. He destroyed some product but said he wasn't. The boss gave him an order, but he took a walk through the warehouse. He got caught 2 times smoking outside. It's not allowed. We're a food company and have a room for smoking, and he was suspected of stealing, but there was no evidence. This all happened before a supervisor caught him the second time smoking outside and then fired him. Story 52, on the first day, he showed up absolutely reeking of pot and asked a bunch of people if they would buy him a burger. Later, he started acting like we'd been best friends his whole life and told me to call him Snowman, said he could get me anything I wanted, and asked if I did heroin SMH. The HR lady was walking by and asked to see him in her office, didn't see him again. Story 53, I don't know if this counts as fired or quitting, but I was working at a grocery store, and in the morning we have to unpack the stuff from the truck. Well, this girl was on her second day, first time throwing truck, and she asked the manager to go out to her car to get something really quick. Long story short, she just drove off in the middle of her shift and never came back for another. Story 54, shortest ever was less than a half hour, including the HR disciplinary. Guy arrived to start his first day in a fairly senior position. Part of the onboarding process is the medical check, usually just eyesight, hearing, blood sugar, blood pressure. The nurse does his heart rate, and it's racing. Blood pressure was all over the place. Speech starts getting more slurred the longer he sits. Nurse asks him outright what he took. Apparently he was nervous, so he decided to smoke a huge joint to calm his nerves. HR came past and withdrew the offer of employment, and he was out the door before 8:30. Toss away a great job for a joint. Story 55, a shop I used to work at hired through a temporary agency. After a few months, they either hired you full-time or let you go. They brought this one kid in. He worked good, and they were going to hire him full-time. The supervisor brought some paperwork for him to get hired on. He filled it out but forgot to sign something. The supervisor brought the paper back to him to sign, but couldn't find him at first. She found him smoking during shift by the emergency exit door. Had to fire him on the spot. Story 56, girl started working at my job. It was her first day, and she said the N-word casually. As a young white lady on shift with my very no black manager, this was a killing blow, and she was fired that day. My company has a zero-tolerance policy on slurs. Thank God. She got maybe 3 hours before she was fired. Story 57, backstory. I met a dude through another dude, and he and his pregnant girlfriend had nowhere to go. I had an insane amount of acreage, and I felt bad for the guy, so I let him stay in his RV on my land, and I even hooked him up to running water and electricity, all of which I paid for. He had a part-time job delivering furniture and never made enough to pay me the paltry $100 he promised to pay me every month for helping them out. When I confront him, he'd tell me he just never worked enough hours to provide for his girlfriend and pay me. I mean, I'm sure the copious plumes of marijuana smoke coming from his RV, which was tiny and contained his pregnant GF, didn't help matters. I blazed too. This isn't a judgment on token, but a judgment on not paying your rent before toking. So, proactively, I got him a job at the hardware store I was assistant manager at until I finished my degree. This was 11 years ago. He came to work, and after 2 hours on his first day, just left, walked out, went back to the RV, which was parked next to my house, and never said anything and never returned, told me it was a bullshit job that was beneath him. It seriously ruined my reputation at that store, and luckily that wasn't my career path or anything.